get started. Thank you all for braving this weather and coming out here this evening. Really do appreciate it. I'm here because I want to learn a little more about vaping so that I in turn could help initiate some more responsive legislation during the next session. So I have a lot to learn from this panel of people here, from questions I might get from the audience. But I first got concerned about vaping 2 years ago. I have a friend who's in the American Legion Writers Group with me, and at worst I'd say he was a moderate smoker. Occasionally I might see a cigarette hanging from his mouth. But we went out on a ride about 2 years ago, and I was 2 bikes behind him, and I'm smelling this really sweet smell. So I'm like 40 feet behind him, and I'm looking around, seeing what kind of flowers might be out there growing. I don't see anything. Finally, we come to a stoplight, and I noticed there was a big smoke vapor coming from around him, and he had one of those big units. They really put out a lot of vapor, and it was a pineapple smell. So after about 3 hours, by the time we got to our first stop, I was like sick of the smell, and I started talking to him. Remember, he was a moderate smoker at worst, and I asked him about vaping. He vaped continually, and his excuse was, I like the flavors, that's why I'm vaping. Well, vaping has nicotine in it, so he went from being possibly a moderate addicted person to an extremely addicted person because of, according to him, it's the flavors, I like the flavors. It's the nicotine that was drawing him to do that. I also have a colleague in the house, and she was a pretty severe smoker, but there are places you can't smoke. You can't smoke in public places, you can't smoke in restaurants, you can't smoke at the Capitol. Well, in her office, she had one of these e-cigarettes with a little blue light at the bottom, and she always had an e-cigarette in her mouth, so she was constantly vaping. So I think we need to take the ban from on vaping and to put it to all public offices, period. Because people who can't smoke in restaurants and stuff like that, they shouldn't be able to smoke in public places, period. So that's some of the reasons that I'm here to hear a little bit. But since Timmy Zawistowski, by the way, who was supposed to be here with me this evening, couldn't come because she has the honor of being named Legislator of the Year from the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, and she's receiving her award just about now. And it's well deserved because she's the ranking member on the Planning and Development Committee, has a lot of interaction with our municipalities and a lot of stuff that really affects day-to-day life in our towns and cities. So it's a well-deserved award. So since she and I kind of decided that we needed this discussion on vaping, she and I have been going a lot of emails. Some people like, thanks for doing this, I'm really curious, I want to know what's going on. A lot of people like, is this really important? You're wasting your time on vaping when we have budget problems. I got this one email today that I thought was rather humorous. It starts off, Bill, lock them up if they're smoking and are underage. I know it doesn't solve the problem, but you're asking us to solve a problem that they, the youths, made for themselves. Oh, come on, you know? I was telling people over here, I was gonna write back to them kind of a snarky comment like, you never drank alcohol when you were underage as a kid? You know, just because it's illegal doesn't mean they're not gonna at least try to do it. But then he does say, raise some questions that may be questions you have here in the audience too. Has a poll been taken to see how many kids in our school system are actually vaping? Is it really a Granby problem or someone else's issue? Have any town kids been hurt by this product? So we have a great panel here with us tonight that'll hopefully address some of those issues and answer some of those questions for you. In the Capitol last year, we passed the Tobacco 21 bill that raised the age of smoking cigarettes and all electronic vaping products and electronic cigarettes to 21. You can't sell it to anyone under the age of 21. It has some built-in requirements that the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services stop by places that sell these things, that they would send someone in who is 16 years of age and under to try to buy one of these vaping products. And if they were caught, then they would be reported to the Department of Revenue Services to take action if they saw fit. So it doesn't have really any teeth into it. So I think that is step number one. And I'm going to work with our Judiciary Committee, with our Commerce Committee, with our Public Health Committee, and Public Safety Committee next year to see how we can strengthen the legislation to really put some teeth into it. One of the other good things that I was just discussing with the panelists is the law that we did pass requires that a retailer, online retailer, has to have proof that someone is 21 years of age in order to buy this product in the mail. So, you know, they can get their parents' license or whatever, they can get some form of ID, but it does have a follow-up that when it's actually delivered, someone who's at least 21 years of age has to show proof and sign for it in order to accept delivery of that product. So hopefully we'll stifle the online sales. Now we just need to address the sales in person at some of these retailers. So again, a great panel of experts here to talk about the local effect here, how it affects people in 62nd District, in our area. And we'd like to start off with Jennifer Curtanis from the Farmington Valley Health District. Specialty and training, relevant statistics, prevention, options, outlooks. What's your experience?
Well, thank you very much for holding this panel and for providing an opportunity for these diverse members of the community to talk about our experiences. I started my public health career in the late 1980s, and my first job was at the American Lung Association of Connecticut. And so at that time, in the late 1980s, we were dealing with, you know, tobacco and smoking cessation, and really trying to reduce the percentage of the population that was smoking cigarettes. So fast forward now, and as the health director, you know, vaping is the single most significant public health threat that is facing our youth, and that's woven in with, you know, a variety of other issues around mental health and mental well-being in general, but it really is a very serious issue. I'm a parent. My kids went through the Granby school system, and the happiest day of, one of the happiest days, I should say the happiest, but one of the happiest days of my life was when my youngest son, some of you may know him, Shane Curtanis, told me that you know, he walked over the Brooklyn Bridge and chucked all his vaping products off the bridge, because for a good year and a half, I, as a parent, was really struggling with a college-age kid who, you know, never smoked, but, you know, experimented like most of our youth do, and for a variety of reasons felt that, you know, vaping was something that he needed to do. And we really had to explore issues around, and I encourage parents to think about this, and I know Anne Marie can talk about this to a great extent, the why. You know, most kids, most teenagers will experiment with different things. The kids that tend, in general, the kids that tend to stick with this are kids that have some underlying stressor. They're vaping because they're anxious. They're vaping because they're afraid of test taking. They're vaping because they're socially uncomfortable. They're vaping now because they're addicted. So, you know, important, and hopefully we'll have some opportunity to discuss, you know, how we can engage these conversations, you know, with our kids. But I just personally can say I struggled with it. It was really hard. What is that message that is going to resonate with my kid? You know, it's not the health effects right away. It's not, and we know that, back dealing with the tobacco issues. So how common is this? You know, unfortunately, it has increased by over 135% in the last year among youth 17 to 19 years of age. And as many as 1 in 4 of our high school seniors report that they're regularly vaping, and 1 in 20 of all high school kids are reporting that they're vaping. We know this because we do surveys in our schools. This is self-reported data, so you know it may very well be under-reporting. And I'm sure the school system can talk to you about, their experiences and what they're actually seeing. What is also very incredibly disturbing from a health perspective is that we actually were seeing over the last several years declines in the rate of cigarette tobacco use across all populations, including teenage girls, which was the last population that it took us to turn the corner on. Now, 67% of high school students that report vaping are reporting that they're also using some other form of tobacco. So it is renormalizing cigarette smoking as well. So these are pretty significant issues. I'm sure people have heard in the last several months, there's been a condition called vaping-related lung injury. This is the most serious and significant adverse lung health effect that we've seen from vaping, with very serious extended hospitalizations, some deaths, hospitalizations upwards of weeks requiring ventilators, high doses of steroids, etc. In the United States, there's been about 2,000 cases identified, and we've only really been tracking this for the last few months. In Connecticut, we've had about 38 cases with 1 death. And the really sad part about this is that 80% of these cases are in the population 35 years or younger, and the vast majority are between the ages of 18 and 29. So this is, really significantly affecting a relatively young population with premature death, occurring in otherwise healthy individuals. Of course, this is the extreme. There's research being conducted. My biggest concern as a public health professional is that the message that's going to be relayed is, oh, it's just the illicit products that you're buying over the counter, or it's just the products that contain THC. They have diagnosed this condition in people that have done non-THC containing product, legally purchased, as well as illegal, over-the-counter products. So again, the message is that vaping in and of itself is harmful. Again, people may say, well, 2,000 cases nationwide isn't a big number. Well, there's other adverse health effects associated with vaping that we're just starting to understand. You're inhaling a vapor with unknown substances into the deepest tissues of our lung. There's nothing good about that in the short term or the long term. The one thing that is particularly problematic, and I imagine Anne Marie will speak to this because she's incredibly eloquent about it, is addiction in youth. Some of these vaping products contain as much nicotine, one pod, if you will, as much nicotine as a single pack of cigarettes. And some of our kids are doing one pod a day, at least. And the developing adolescent brain is far more at risk of addiction because of the way the brain is developing than an older, more mature adult. So that's one thing that I think is important for parents to know, is that when you're engaging a conversation with a youth who has been vaping, don't underestimate the power of addiction, and really have the conversation and explore. It's not going to be enough to say, oh, it's bad, just don't do it. You're going to have to work with them to come up with alternatives. Maybe it involves nicotine replacement, etc. And youth cessation is just evolving. So it's complex in that there aren't a lot of evidence-based youth cessation programs adult youth cessation programs are being applied. Some pediatricians are being encouraged to use nicotine replacement. As an example, they're not approved for youth, but are being encouraged to use them, etc. So again, addiction is really important. So I won't talk too much more, but I think some of the significant challenges are that youth, the perception of youth is, they're invincible, right? And so they also have a perception, although I think that is changing slowly, that vaping is not hazardous or isn't as hazardous as other things. So that is a challenge. The marketing to youth, the flavors, the technology, who promotes it, is all very appealing to our youth. So I think that from a policy perspective, anything that we can do to, reduce the pro-tobacco influences that are, encouraging this, limiting point-of-sale advertising, access, the placement of advertisements, doing something about the flavoring and the things that make it really appealing to youth, are all really important policy discussions that we should be having. And again, tightening up on the tobacco 21 as it relates to people who are providing it. I don't think we cannot and should not criminalize those that are doing it, as your email person suggested. Let's face it, for many kids, they're doing this because they have other underlying issues, and what mental health challenges, and I'm saying from just stress and anxiety. I mean, I don't mean mental health in a big picture way, but the kinds of stressors we all have every day they blossom in isolation. So what do? We take these kids that are probably engaged in some of these things, and then we say, you're bad, go away for a little while and think about what you did, kind of a thing. And I think we can and should be rethinking how we wrap our arms around these youth and try and figure out what are the underlying motivators, for some, not all, that are encouraging this type of behavior. One last, I wouldn't be the health director. If you know a youth that is currently vaping, I absolutely urge you to have them get a flu shot, because they are considered immunocompromised. They are at higher risk of developing the flu, and if they have to be hospitalized with either vape-related lung illness or the flu, it will be much more difficult for our healthcare providers to sort out what it is that they're dealing with. So take your kid and get the flu shot. This is not a population that typically gets the flu shot. Make sure they get their flu shot.
Well, a lot of great information. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next, our assistant principal from Granby Memorial High School, Julia Green. Talk us about what's happening in the high school.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think I echo everyone's sentiments. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight on this snowy, icy night, but it's such an important topic. And I would say I would not limit the discussion to just the high school. I think that vaping as the national, I would encourage families to Google the National Tobacco Survey. It comes out every year. And the National Youth Tobacco Survey is taking a look at tobacco consumption, nicotine consumption for a month-long period. And there's been significant increases and jumps in the use of e-cigs at the middle school level and at the high school level. I would say the evolution at the high school probably goes back to the 2017-2018 school year. I brought a demo here. So I'll start by thanking every parent. Whenever we've searched a student and we have found vape or vape materials, obviously we'd only be returning that to a parent. We would not be returning it to a student. And the majority of the time, the parent's response has been, I don't want it back. And I've said, if we talk to parents, other parents, we would use it for that purpose. And parents have have been very generous. So I would say going back to 2017, 2018, what we were finding are these silicone end caps, which when they're sent encompass the vape pods that people are talking about. And we were finding them on the floor. We were finding them on the carpet. We were finding them different places. Custodians were bringing them up to us. And we didn't really know what we were looking at, to be very candid with you. We weren't seeing the pods. We were just seeing these silicone end caps. And at that point, people thought that maybe they had to do with like a flash drive or something like that. And then pretty quickly from there, because the school district has a one-on-one computer initiative, what we were finding was that people were actually plugging in something like this, which is a pod, to their Chromebooks.
Oh, wow.
But people, again, you know, I'm going back a couple years now, we weren't really sure what they were looking at. And now we do, but at the time we didn't. And so from there, we initially started with just making our faculty aware of things to be looking for these, looking for people plugging in devices like this into their Chrome. It might just be kind of sticking up on the end, asking a few more questions. And then from there, we kicked off the 2018-2019 school year really strong. We were looking at our school policy regarding vaping. We were looking at making our students aware of our concerns. And I think the approach that we took, which I think works for our students, is that of concern. You know, that we saw it at the time as a health crisis. We really didn't have the backing at that time from maybe the community as much, because there was more to be found. But we were just saying to students, like, look, if you're vaping right now, you need to be aware. You've got this device. You need to look up on your computer about vaping. Be educated about this, because this is a health concern. From there, we did parent outreach at our PAC meetings for parents to try to help parents be aware of what to look for. So, you know, vapes, the jewels that you're hearing people talk about are these little guys here. Those are the popular, that pod is a little bit smaller. But this is what the students like, are these jewels, because they're small, they're cheap. To target females, they've come in colors and sizes, so then we were finding that students wanted a certain vape. They wanted to have something that reflected who they are. And I found that rather alarming as well. So these come in colors, they come in sizes. Just to give you an example, so, you know, they're not, Juul is what you hear on the television. This is a more recent thing we found, which is what they're calling a vape pen. And it connects with something else. So they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. This is a very expensive model where you're controlling the liquid that's going in, and it's heated to a much higher temperature than you might find from a Juul. So just for parents to be aware of maybe what to look for to kind of start with. And I agree with Jennifer, having that conversation with your child about, you know, what's going on. It's happening. It's happening on buses. It's happening walking along. If you go on vacation, I just notice how many more people are vaping, because now I'm aware. I can't unsee it. And I just think that parents have to engage in that conversation with their kids. I also commend Jennifer for just reiterating that, you know, it used to be that vaping was targeted for smokers, for adults that wanted smoking cessation, but it's clearly being marketed to the younger population. And the other angle that we tried to take is to say to our students, look what's happened. They are rebranding nicotine for you. They're making it technologically more savvy. They're making it leaner and meaner. It's got, you know, again, that technology angle to it. It's being brilliantly marketed to you, and you need to be much, much more careful than you're being, because it's no different than how tobacco was being marketed in the 1950s. So we've taken that approach. We also, if a student is caught, we've not angled to just do, you know, immediate suspension. We're doing Saturday schools with a tobacco and nicotine awareness article about vaping and some of the health concerns, was something that students have to reflect and write. So we're trying to take the approach of educating our students about our health concerns. We also go into the 9th and 10th grade wellness classes as a lesson with this. That lesson I know is also going on in the middle school, but I think the solution is the same education that we had when we had the big tobacco money, saying you're going in at the younger ages and you're starting this curriculum much younger. I think it needs to start at the elementary schools, just as we're talking about we don't want our kids smoking, we don't want our kids vaping, we don't want our kids, doing drugs, and just to echo that this is a gateway to smoking and a gateway to other things. Parents need to be aware of that. What I've seen on the positive is that 2 years ago, if a student was found in possession of vape or vape paraphernalia, there was a lack of understanding, maybe not, parents weren't aware, and some parents were glad their kids were vaping and not smoking. That has dramatically shifted. We have a lot more support from parents saying, wow, he told me, or she said she wasn't doing this anymore. And we're going to need to continue to talk about that. So that's one thing I'd say is positive. I'm very pleased with the legislation as of October 1, because I was seeing a lot of kids obtaining this through the internet with grandma and grandpa's gift cards from the holidays and using it to purchase it online. Kids were buying pods from one another. So even if they didn't have a vape, they might have had the pods and then were borrowing someone else's vape. So I do hope that legislatively this will help decrease the amount of kids who are exposed to this and ultimately addicted. And I would also say, as a compliment to our students, that students are tired of going into the bathrooms and seeing vaping. So are there kids vaping? Yes. They're hiding it. I'm not TSA. I'm also not going into the men's room for obvious reasons. If I'm going in because a student has said, hey, there's someone vaping in the locker room, or I think there's someone vaping in the bathroom, and they're tired of it, and we go in, we may miss that window. We can go back and have probable cause to search a student, but frankly, students who are vaping on a regular basis are hiding it in their underwear. I'm going to say that on television, and we're not doing that type of a search. So it starts at home with those important conversations that we're having with our kids around alcohol and nicotine and drugs, and it continues into that with partnering with the school. And also to put a shout out to the Granby Police, who partnered with us when we did our principals chats about vaping. And we had an officer at every single chat we did at every grade level and they've always partnered with us, and we are very thankful. So I'm glad to see it's on the forefront. That's where it needs to be.
Thank you. Again, a whole lot of great information. Officer Christina Deltado, tell us a little bit about your interaction with the school system and about vaping.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everybody who took the time to come out. I'm going to tag along to what you said, Julie, because our police department is fantastic. We have a great working relationship with the schools, the high school, but the middle school as well. And I think, just to use last year as an example, I think in the years previous to that, it was newer, and kids were gravitating towards it. Myself as a parent, I have a 24-year-old who, when she was in college at the time, it's alluring. They're pulling in. We go to the hookah bars, and I'm thinking she doesn't smoke. So I'm thinking, you don't know until you take the time and you educate. It starts at home. I agree. What we do in the school and what we do in the police department, we try to educate and get the word out. I think this and reading this public act, this bill that came forward, definitely makes it a lot easier for us. I think it's very clear, 21, not here, not there. It was very, I think you had even said it was a little confusing a couple of years ago. We saw a lot more calls up at the school. We saw a lot of this. I think it was Kim that had put it right on the table and said, what do we do? And it was new. We saw a lot more of it. I think now, as you just said too, I think the kids are hiding it more. So I agree with what you're saying. It starts at home. It starts with communication. We each have a part to do, and we take that seriously, not only in the police department, but with the schools, being on the youth service board. We try to educate each and every one, and it takes time to get to kids. Some want to hear it, some don't. We've partnered with some great parents, and it's a learning experience for us all. So I think in that respect, we're learning, we're growing. It's better. We're educating ourselves. In terms of one of the questions or one of the issues you had on here, challenges of enforcing. This law has made it certainly easy. I mean, we have a whole list of, we can write a ticket for all things, first offense, second offense. is that really going to change it? We can give you a, you know, a $50 or $100 fine. We can go all the way up to $1,000. What are you learning? Some do. Some learn by being pinched a little bit. If it was my kid, they're going to pay that ticket by themselves. Maybe they're going to learn, but each kid is different. And I think as parents, as a community, we have to look at all aspects of it. And I really do believe it starts at home and this type of conversation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Now, our Youth Service Bureau, Andrew Cox, please tell us your experiences.
Okay. So vaping first came to my attention actually from a parent about 5 years ago. I was trying to find it, went back through my Facebook history, but she had just sent me a, you know, have you heard about these Juuls and what are they? I'm like, no idea. And it hadn't come up yet. So that, I guess this perspective on, 5 years ago, it was kind of like, what is this? To a national epidemic, which, just to clarify, we're talking youth because I'm Youth Service Bureau and that's where a lot of us are focused, but it's not just kids. You know, we're real concerned about kids because of some of the brain development pieces, and they are more at risk for harm to their brains more quickly than adult users. But as Jen was saying, I mean, this is young adult to, you know, up to mid-30s. It's not just a kid thing. So anyways, 5 years ago, to 3 years ago, every single Youth Service Bureau meeting I went to, everyone was going, oh my gosh, what are we doing about this? The kids are vaping, you know, in the schools, and, you know, it just exploded. So why and how did that happen? My son is in his third year of college, and again, it's already been touched on. It happened because these Juuls, not just Juul, but Juul's the company everybody knows, but it was marketed specifically and heavily to young people and young adults. There is no way to, you know, sugarcoat that. It's, you know, the flavors, strawberry shortcake and, you know, apple blueberry. I mean, these were not marketed to adults. This went from a smoking cessation idea that sounded really good to heavily being marketed to youth. And our kids, our middle school kids want to be like high school kids. Our high school kids want to be like college kids, and man, Juuls were everywhere on college campuses. And my son came home at the end of his freshman year with a story, you know, just talking about that they were everywhere. I'm sure he tried, but it just was not something that was particularly interested in. But he was really a little bit shaken by a friend of his who had started using Juuls while he was a freshman. The sort of energy burst, like why anybody started smoking cigarettes, right? Nicotine works, it makes you feel kind of alert or whatever. His comment was his friend was now addicted. There was no question about it. He was addicted to nicotine, and his friend would never, ever in a million years have picked up a cigarette to smoke. I mean, just wouldn't have, you know, and why? Because, and again, you know, I'm reiterating what other people have said, the risk perception was not just low, it was, this was safe. And as I started working with clients, kids who were, in addition to other things going on in their lives, they were vaping, right? That was what was difficult. Parents and I myself were struggling. Most adults looked at this and said, you know what, there's going to be a downside to this. I mean, there's even, because the other thing that some of you might not know is that kids could be vaping and doing what they were called was juicing. And juicing was, they believed, whether it was accurate or not, that all they were doing was getting the flavored vapor, that it didn't have any drug component to it. So it didn't have nicotine or THC. And that's the other thing, is that these vape pens and devices and the products that are bought in there, they may just be nicotine, but they may also have, depending on where you live, across the border, 5 miles up the road, THC products are legal for recreational use. Many of those vape devices, like that very expensive mod kit that Julie has, are excellent for smoking marijuana, you know, type products. So anyways, but the vape devices were marketed as being safe. FDA approved ingredients, right? Now they're coming from China, but okay, FDA approved ingredients. You know, everything, food safe, quality, you know, and you read the Juul, and I did. I went online, I'm reading this, like, I don't buy it, I don't buy it, I don't buy it. I think this is going to be dangerous. Well, as you start to get into it, over the summer, I went to a conference at the Juvenile Justice Department put on. Yale Medical had just completed their first $10 million study into vaping. And one of the things that, you know, the aha moment as I'm listening is just, FDA approved means it's okay to eat it. There's nothing about that that says it's okay to breathe it. And it was like, that makes sense, right? So whether it was the flavoring or the other types of things that went into these suspensions, and as we turn out, the thing that they think, the CDC thinks has caused the hospitalizations is linked to a vitamin E thing that when vaporized, which means you're not burning it, you're just heating it to the point of vaporization, creates this oil. And that oil ingested in the lungs coated it and created this problem we have. That oil or that vitamin was FDA approved you could put it in food and eat it without there being any problems with it. You just can't breathe it. But that's now, we know that now. Even 2 years ago, when you were talking to kids, they would literally, kids are good at it, they would give you, cite the articles, and they would give you the ingredient lists, and they would tell you, and parents didn't know what to say. And quite honestly, I didn't know what to say either with the kids. I couldn't prove it. I could say, I think there's going to be problems. I'm not sure. I could talk about the fact that some of this stuff is coming from China, and we've had problems with, toys and jewelry from China. Why are we going to think that something that you're breathing into your lungs isn't going to carry a problem with it? But there wasn't any proof. So I am hoping that as we shift, that risk, factor, and we start to see greater risk, and we can educate our kids and our families about the greater risk, that we will then see a reduced use, because we know that the lower the perceived risk, the greater the use is. That's also why we are seeing such an increase in marijuana use among kids, because of the legalization for medical use and for recreational use. The perceived risk is so low. For both nicotine, and for those of you, nicotine is highly addictive, and it is as addictive as cocaine, based on lots and lots of research. And so, why market it? Again, why would the tobacco companies market to youth? Well, because we started having some real good success in getting kids to not smoke. There's a lot of money to be made, obviously, in this. And so we want to look at, again, youth. So not touching on what adults do. For youth, it was touched on, adolescent brain development. It's sort of a fascination of mine to make it, to take what I can usually talk for about an hour on. Really fast, the brain doesn't finish developing until about age 25. It's a slow process of rewiring from back to front, starting at about age 3. It is literally a rewiring process. The synapses that we use get wired so they work faster and more efficiently, and the ones we don't use anymore get pruned out. Again, back to front. What is being rewired right around adolescence? It's the mid portion of the brain. The last to develop is prefrontal cortex. That's why it takes till 25 for us to make really good rational decisions all the time. But right when we hit teenage, middle school and high school, middle part of the brain. What's happening in the middle part of the brain? One of the really important things, it's the reward center of the brain. So in a nutshell, why it's so bad is if we have, so teenagers are, so that part of the brain is supposed to light up for 2 primary things, food and sex. And when I say sex, I don't mean sex. I mean, I'm becoming aware of the fact that maybe I'm attracted to, to people, and cute person, I like her hair, I like just those beginnings of things that give you that sort of little light up. And when our brains light up, the pleasure response, it's dopamine that's released in the brain. And our brain has a certain number of receptors, and the dopamine goes, and we go, that feels good. So for survival of the species, we need to feed our teenagers so they can go on and procreate, and they need to develop some desire to procreate. And that's how our human species continues, right? So that's the natural. We add things that little dopamine spike, no. Nicotine goes, tons of dopamine out there. Great, so what happens is we wire the brain to want this artificial high that's not something that we find in nature. All right, so what that means for kids who drink, who use marijuana, who are exposed to nicotine, while they might not reach levels of addiction as that teenager, what we've done is we've wired them to desire that level of response as young adults, and they are 6 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder as adults than teenagers who are not exposed to things beyond the food and and sex, for lack of a better way to say that. So that's the risk, that's the danger, and so that was really kind of like what we were dealing with. And so when we talk about locking the kids up for doing it, this was not a problem or an issue they created. It was created by the people that marketed and the vaping devices and took it beyond smoking cessation to something that should be used for fun, and that perceived risk being so, not even low risk, it was perceived as negative risk. I have seen that change. Now, part of what I'm supposed to talk about is sort of the responsiveness and what did we see in Granby. Absolutely a Granby problem, just as it was a Simsbury, Avon, everywhere problem. And again, saw kids, unlike when it was tobacco, and I would say there was a difference in because the perception of the risk was lower. There were kids using and vaping that, and they talked about this also in the Yale study when they did a more extensive survey, they were seeing athletes who were vaping before games because that sort of, pumped up, the nicotine kind of does that, and their perception was they weren't harming themselves, where athletes typically were not the smokers of 15, 20 years ago. So that was concerning, that it was, that perception of use was so low that it was pulling in people who wouldn't have. And again, that goes into my son's story of his friend who would never have smoked a cigarette. But then I also had kids that were talking about who were, that small percentage of kids in Granby who do smoke, who started vaping because it was, in their perception, perhaps a safer alternative to smoking, and also easier to get away with, right? Because their parents didn't want them to be smoking, so vaping looked like a good alternative. And again, small sample. This is just very small perspective. I'm talking about 2 kids sharing this but similar path. They started thinking it would be a good alternative, but what they both found, and I think somebody else talked about this, where they were smoking a couple of cigarettes a day, once they were using the pods, they were going through an entire pod a day. So, I think it was you who were talking about that with your friend, an adult friend. So they went from a minimal amount of nicotine to the equivalent of an entire pack of cigarettes a day, nicotine using this, because it's so easy to use. But it suddenly got very expensive. So where were they left? With an addiction that was now greater than what they started with, that they can no longer afford, and possibly having to go back to smoking cigarettes and a combination of, depending, in order to maintain that habit. So and that they were left with an addiction that was more difficult and more entrenched than what they had started with, and that was what we were working with, is trying to figure out some ways to address that addiction. And as Jen said, we don't have great cessation programs for youth, particularly designed for youth, and it's going to be a learning process as we go along. Cognitive behavior therapy is one of the recommended counseling approaches to it, but we also know that cigarette, nicotine addiction is a tough one to quit. And so these kids are potentially going to be fighting for a while, or if they ever can. Many of us know somebody who smoked until they were, on breathing machines in hospitals and couldn't quit. So that is the risk, that we're looking at, is that this low risk, as they thought, behavior, even if they don't develop the lung issues, is setting them up for a lifetime of fighting that addiction. And again, there's also then the THC component of it, making another easy way to ingest the marijuana, based products. And the last thing I'm going to touch on is a little bit of what we talked about, is that mental health issue and component. Again, all different kinds of people do different things, but a lot of times, you will have a whole lot of kids that will go through, and I think Tommy will speak to this. My daughter's here, she could speak to it, although she won't, because I don't, why would you make me do that, Mom? That, are not tempted at all, right? That they just wouldn't do this. It's not, you're not supposed to do it, the school says we're not supposed to do it, and they're not gonna do it. They're not risk takers. They're not pushing that envelope. They don't wanna do that. And then you have that component of kids, and that, and you know, when every single age group in here, we all know that when we were in high school, we had our friends or people we knew who were a little bit more anti-establishment, who were, if you put a rule there, they were going to kind of push for a way to do it. Vaping was a great way to do that. It was kind of fun, it was kind of exciting, and it was easy to do, and you know, that little thrill that some people got for being able to do something that was a little anti-establishment and get away with it because it was so hard for teachers to catch. And then you took that when looked at some of the kids that I knew were vaping. Then there were also the kids that took it beyond the thrill to the kids who didn't feel great about themselves, who were a little bit angry, who didn't feel like school, Granby, parents, whatever, they're mad. They're a little bit, you know, and so doing something that's against the rules kind of feeds into that, helps them, as odd as it might sound, feel a little bit better, right? They're going to push the system and they're going to do this, and you can't make me do that. And that personality, that reaction has been around for forever. Vaping fit into that. The drug does work. When you know, I never smoked, but this apparently feels a little good when you first get that nicotine rush, right? That's a reason why people kind of go back to it. So that kind of fits in. That little bit of the rebelliousness, the, you know, self-esteem building, it kind of fed into that. And then you also, if somebody is, that self-esteem might be low because of depression or anxiety, or there are all these different things that can also build on why does one kid start doing something that is not legal and why does another kid not. And we talk about resiliency factors, you know, the more things that are going right in a child's life or a young adult's life, the less likely they are to do some of these high risk things. So from a community standpoint, from a youth services standpoint, in our responsiveness, you know, our first thing is we're trying to educate. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It is so difficult to pry any of us out of our homes anymore to come to something. So part of the Youth Service Bureau, we've started doing podcasts because we can't get people to come and listen to things. What were our first two podcasts? One was on the adolescent brain development, and the second one was on vaping. They were done the beginning of this year. And the third one, I think, is going to be on pornography addiction, you know, fun times. But we think it's really important, and we're doing everything in our power to find ways to get that education out to parents, because as people have talked about, and Screening has talked about, we lowered smoking rates because the education was pervasive. That kids from kindergarten on up and parents knew that we were going to teach our kids that smoking was dangerous for us. And that's what we need to do with things like this. So that's one part of our responsiveness. You know, and having, you know, people like Christine on our Youth Service Bureau, you know, we have an advisory board, and, you know, getting information, Tommy sits on the board with us, and getting information about what's going on in the community to sort of tailor what our education is going to be about is really important. 5 years ago, I didn't know what vaping was. Now I'm somewhat of an expert on vaping. So that's part of our approach, is the education piece, and then also building the resiliency. So a lot of what the town of Granby's taxpayers pay for the Youth Service Bureau, we're a very small line item, but we are a line item, is both for the education, but also for trying to find and do the positive youth development kinds of programs that will provide connection and support and fun things for kids that may or may not be getting those elsewhere. You know, so we try to not duplicate services, but find those niches. So we do leadership development programs. Some of those kids are here today. And we also do things that are for, you know, building social skills, building self-esteem. Small group programs is more what we tend to do. And because that fits into prevention, because it's building those resiliency factors. You know, a lot of times a program that I might run for kids who are in middle school, some of those kids are the same kids that will then be willing to reach out to come and see me as a counselor when they need it, because they've met us and they feel good about this agency because of a fun thing. It makes it less scary to reach out for help if they need it for something else. So that's kind of what our response is. Those are the resources that we offer. We do screening. I'm trained in a program that's called Teen Intervene, but it is it's based on an interview format of helping address how serious is a youth's addiction or use of a drug, so nicotine or marijuana. And then it's a screening and a brief intervention and trying to connect them with the kind of resources that we do. So we can do that screening here. There's a free of charge. We provide free of charge counseling services. Some of our youth programs are free of charge. We are not trying to make a profit on them, so they're always really cheap. I think the most, it's very, got a couple of parents nodding their heads. We keep it really cost effective. Again, because we want to make sure that we're filling those gaps, that kids have the access to it, and economics aren't going to keep them from doing that, because the more isolated or disconnected kids feel, the more likely they are to engage in risky behaviors as they get older. I hope that makes sense. I kind of went on a ramble.
Okay, thank you so much. I've learned an awful lot tonight from our experts in their own fields. Now let's hear from someone who's actually in school, Tommy Zugolinski, who is actually a junior, not a sophomore, and on the Youth Action Council. Tell us your perspective.
All right, thank you. So I'm mostly going to use my experiences to reinforce a lot of things that have been said. So, like, we've been saying that the vaping phenomenon kind of started in around the 2017 to 2018 school year, and my grade was actually, we were freshmen in that year, which I feel like makes us one of the hardest hit years, or like age groups of people, because that's the year where you start hanging out with people who are 3 or 4 years older than you. You start hanging out with the seniors through sports and clubs and through just your own social interactions, and sometimes college freshmen. And like, we want to be cool for the older cool kids, so we do what they do and we see them vaping. So a lot of kids in my grade started vaping. I remember the end of 8th grade, hardly anyone was doing it, and by the beginning of 9th grade, it just happened. Like, everybody was vaping. I was on the cross-country team that year, and we would have team dinners, and we had a team camp out one night, and I would just remember there'd be so many vapes. Like, we were in a tent at one of the, like, sleepovers, and I had to get out of the tent because they ended up just hotboxing it with probably 10 vapes, and there was a lot of smoke, and there was a lot of kids. They would be talking about they got their vapes taken away, so they would be borrowing them from other people. You would have the older kids selling them to the younger kids. They were just, like, if you got caught, you just went to one of your many friends. Some people had 5 or 6 of them, so they could lend you one for a day. And I noticed that really picked up fast. And for me, at that time, I always just assumed, like, I guess I always thought that they had nicotine in them, even if most people thought that they didn't, because I had always heard the term e-cigarette, and I was like, oh, because it's a cigarette, it probably has nicotine, and I shouldn't be even going near that. So, like, I guess I'm lucky in that kind of ignorant way where I just always assumed that it was really bad, and luckily it turned out that it is. So, but it's, over the years, it's definitely died down in, like, talking about it, but I feel like it hasn't really died down in terms of people doing it. Like, in freshman year, people were talking, it was the hip new thing, the cool thing that all the older kids were doing, so we should do it too. And it's just definitely become quieter, it's more under the table, like, kids are sneaking it more. And I've even noticed some kids are now smoking cigarettes because they think it's just, like, it's the next step from vaping. I hear kids talking about the parties that they had over the weekend, and there was alcohol and there was cigarettes, and even some people who were like, who would never pick up a cigarette, but they vape, and they say, oh no, I'm not gonna, why would I have done a cigarette? Like, why would I have smoked a cigarette? That's crazy. But then they vape, so it just, I feel like ignorance is a huge part of it, where people don't know that like vaping a whole pod is a pack of cigarettes. So I feel like just getting that knowledge through to them would probably help a good chunk of people.
Thank you, Tommy. Question for you, Tommy. Do you think that the education that's being given by, the school systems and by the Youth Bureau and by our police department, do you think it's making an impact or reaching the students?
I think the information being presented is great. I think it's just a lack of the students taking it in, because we're also starting in around late middle school, early high school years. We are in that age where we're, like, rebellious, and it's cool to, like, not listen to adults, and so anything an adult says, you're like, whatever, why would I believe you? I remember kids would talk about, like remember what that teacher said about vaping and how it's bad. That's a bunch of baloney. How could it be bad? It doesn't even have nicotine in it. So I feel that we're definitely at the point where it's like, it's the most important time to be getting that information, but it's also the most useless time to be giving that information because none of us are listening or we take it in.
I would just add to that, I agree. One of the things that we try to do here, we run what's called a peer education program where we will take very small groups of interested youth and educate them about the risks or a topic. It's not all about risks, whether it's about human sexuality or opioid crisis or vaping, because just what Tommy said, and he could absolutely have been quoting me, the last person that your average middle school or high school person is going to go to with a question about something or believe is going to be an authority figure. It's going to be their peers. And so that was part of why, I know that most of the kids in the audience probably could have come up with things that they would rather have done tonight. But the fact that maybe if each of you are like, maybe there is some, facts to this, that you guys are drops in the pond and the ripple effects of a friend making a comment about, they're really overreacting to this whole vape crisis thing, and you just disagree, and sharing your opinion, those kids really didn't, those people ended up in the hospital, and just because it's FDA approved doesn't mean that you should be breathing it. It's just as simple as that. You don't have to be an expert. That is going to be more profound, unfortunately, than every podcast that I make or that, but it's the culmination of all of those things together. So that if we get youth that are reinforcing what they're learning in middle school and high school, and we get parents reinforcing that, if the message becomes really consistent, it's going to be more effective. But peer education is used in a lot of public health initiatives. It's not just a youth thing. We all are more likely to take information from a peer. We're going to call a friend. I got this. What do you think? I got this mole. Should I go see the doctor or not? Right? Or that conversation with your girlfriend who doesn't have a medical degree, but somehow talking to our friends about it. That's the first person we go to.
I think, Tommy raises a really important point, and that is while, education it's important, and we all place a lot of emphasis on that, but policymakers need to know that there are other policies that need to be put in place. I mean, some of the single most effective policies around that resulted in reductions in tobacco use were increasing the tobacco taxes, so increasing the cost of these products, and limiting where they could be used. We have a great indoor air law in Connecticut. It was one of the first passed, I think, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, but how many of our towns have smoke-free park policies? How many of our towns, prohibit smoking and vaping in other types of, places? So that we're not seeing them when we go walk our dog at Salmon Brook Park, or so these are other types of policies that I think the legislature can and should consider. And the other thing that I will just mention to you, most folks probably don't know that Connecticut, our Attorney General Blumenthal way back at the time was very effective at getting tobacco settlement dollars from the tobacco industry. Well, Connecticut doesn't use the tobacco settlement dollars the way it was intended. It was intended to be used for public health programming to support things like anti-tobacco campaigns, education, etc. And maybe we should be looking at how we use our tobacco settlement dollars to better support these educational efforts, the schools and what they're having to deal with, with the cost of alternative schooling and supporting kids that are now addicted. So just 3 specific suggestions.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, I thought so.
And Julie, a question for you. Does the State Board of Education have any specific curriculum regarding vaping in the public health?
That's a good question. I really don't know if I could address that specifically. I know that there's definitely lessons around nicotine and tobacco, but I can't speak to that specifically. The only other thing I'd like to add too is I think there's a mindset. I think back to when I was in high school, and I had a high school at the time. I'm dating myself here, that had a place to smoke. They called it the butt lounge back in the day. And I think that there is a perception around this, especially for parents and people people of my age and older, that think that we kind of use these labels like good kids, bad kids. My kid's never going to do that. And I think that this is very mainstream, I guess is what I'm going to say. And I think you have to throw out all those labels and just say, students are at a time in their life where they're with their friends, they're athletes, they're Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and they help out at maybe a religious organization on the weekend or whatever. They're doing wonderful community service. These are great kids that are in our communities. Yeah. And these are kids that are vaping. And that's just a fact. And I appreciated the example that Tommy shared about camping, because this is a big camping community around here, around graduation, around certain events. And let's go into nature and let's camp. But that also means that maybe you're drinking and maybe you're vaping and doing some other things. So I just, again, want to say that this is very mainstream for our kids. It's not, the evil kid, that's doing this and, he comes from a bad family. No, it's not that. It's everyday families, good kids, good parents that care about their kids. And this is just what's happening. We have to be able to embrace those everyday conversations around what's going on and really be candid with one another about what kids are seeing. So just to put it out there, this is very mainstream, and it's not just, if you're thinking that your kids' friends aren't exposed to this or doing this, I think frankly you're being naive.
I have a question. You said the stuff is FDA approved. Normally when the FDA approves things, there's labeling involved with use, the way it gets used. Are these things, like, are cigarettes labeled with how much nicotine is, I don't really know, how much nicotine is in there, and are these things labeled with how much?
Oh, so the Juuls aren't FDA approved. It's that the ingredients that they were using to make the flavors and things were were FDA approved as, for in many cases, food additives.
Right.
But the problem is that they're using them in a way that the FDA didn't approve them for. So that,
because there's usually rules. FDA has rules. When they approve stuff, they say you may use this for this, and that's pretty much all you can do with it.
And it's a perfect example of how industry has gotten far ahead of government and regulation. I don't think it's until like this year that they'll actually be required, FDA will require these products to list their ingredients. So we've had, many years where it's cowboy, you can sell whatever you want without labeling.
I have a question for you. What is nicotine withdrawal? What are some symptoms that somebody might experience, or what might you notice as a parent?
Yeah, did you want to speak to that, Anne? Agitation, distraction, sweating, those are, I've never experienced it fortunately, but those are signs and symptoms. There's a tool that can be used and administered that asks a variety of questions, specifically for youth. I don't know if you've seen it, the Hangstrom survey.
Heard of it, I haven't used it.
Where, it asks about 10 questions, and each answer is given a point scale, 1, 2, and 3, and it indicates, where you are in that addiction scale, if that's something that you would be interested in exploring. But, there are physical symptoms, distraction, feeling like, just where I need that. And then there's also physical symptoms as well.
Irritability, I think, is also one of them, isn't it?
Yeah.
One other question. So I love the approach of when we find someone that's a youth that's experimenting or using these products, that we approach them with compassion and love and wrapping our arms around it, because that's just a symptom of something else going on. I'm wondering about legally, what are the repercussions for people who are buying, the adults who are buying these drugs for these youth? Because, I mean, alcohol is that way. If I, as an adult, go and buy a bunch of booze for my kids and their friends, then I can be held. There's consequences for that for me.
Officer?
There is. That's a real good question, and that's because of this act that's come about and previous. There are particular charges if you're supplying, if you're giving it to someone. I mean, we were having this discussion at work earlier because of, back in the day, I think when all this was coming out, it was a little bit confusing. So, you're 15, but I'm going to give you this to hold, but now you're in possession of it or you're using it. There were so many little different caveats, if you will. This is pretty clear. If I'm buying it for a 15-year-old, I'm responsible for that. Very clear. And that makes, I think, our job a lot easier. And you have to get that point across, because make no mistake, be it this, be it alcohol, there are some that have the mentality that they're kids and it's going to be fine, and they don't get it. So it's not just the kids we try to educate, it's also the parents. And a good percentage of the time, I think we get that across. There is a small percentage of the time you're met with resistance, the typical, not my kid, I'm not doing anything wrong. I mean, we all have them in our community that, we don't want to acknowledge. It's just a party. I'm going to supply the alcohol. I'm going to supply the. It's like anything else. It's getting that message out there and holding accountable. You have to, because if you turn a blind eye, there's 10 other people that are watching that, and you're just continuing the problem, and it gets bigger and bigger. Good question.
I have a question for Julie. I'm totally unfamiliar with this. I just watch the news and stuff. But do kids have to light it?
No, so they're battery operated, they're electric.
Oh, God.
So they're charged, and this is what you'd use like on a computer.
Okay.
So that's what was so great about it too, is that it's not a lighter, it's battery, and then they're charging it, and then we're not even really seeing this, we're just seeing this. And I just want to say too, like, you think about cigarettes and you think about people smoking, and it's this like almost like this grand gesture. And vaping, if a kid has this underneath their sweatshirt, they're just doing this. So it's really, I mean, it's small, it doesn't take up a lot of space. If you really don't know what you're looking for, it's a small gesture that you might miss.
And you can't smell it?
And you don't always smell it. So the oils, like, I can smell the oils, I can't unsmell the oils. Like, even taking this stuff out today, I got it on my hands, and it's like, I mean, I had stuff that I didn't even want to bring because it just smelled. And I have it in a bag for a reason. But a lot of the pods, if they're not menthol or something like that, they really don't have an odor. And you can also, inhale, and you're not necessarily making a puff of smoke either. So there's no puff of smoke unless you're purposely wanting that. If you're not, you're doing it, and you might not necessarily, you might go, it might go under the table. People might not know.
So if you catch if a student bends over and falls out of his pocket, can you confiscate that?
Yep, and I would.
So it's not allowed in school at all, whether he's doing it or
No,
not?
absolutely not.
Okay.
And again, I don't want to make it seem like we're just rampantly searching students. It's probable. It's really what it is a probable cause. So if a student says, I saw this student, and this student was vaping in the back of the room and the teacher didn't notice, then that's enough for me to go and ask to escort that student down to a private office. There's always 2 people, myself and someone else. And we basically are emptying their backpack. We're asking them to empty their pockets. We're asking them to take their shoes off. But to be, just to be very candid, the students now that are consistently using vapes, they know that, they know what the search is going to entail, and they might be handing it to someone else very easily, or they're, as I said, we're not TSA agents, so that's not the level of searching that we're doing.
I volunteer at the middle school. I teach junior achievement. And one time a kid was coming to class, this is 8th grade, and he had something in here. He went like this and put it back in. I didn't know what it was.
No, now you know.
Yeah.
Now you know.
8th grade.
And I think that one of the things they're saying when we would get together, the schools, and I'm actually not speaking specifically to Granby, because the people that I was in these meetings with were more Simsbury, Avon. This is so much more difficult to catch and to pay attention to than smoking was. You know, I'm also old enough to remember the smoking lounge in my high school. The kids that were smoking, you knew who the smokers were, because even if they had smoked, they you know, at lunchtime they carried that odor with them the whole day. You know, and this is quick and subtle. And well, why, you know, and at first there was some pushback. Well, why aren't the schools? It's like, yeah, you tell me how a teacher in charge of a classroom of 25 or 30 kids who's turning to write something on the board, in that 30 seconds, somebody just could have vaped in the back, and you know, really, really difficult, I think, you know, with everything else that's going on. And again, also for parents, trying to find these things. These are smaller than a thumb drive. Think of all of the places in a kid's bedroom that a vape pen could be, or a vape device could be hidden, you know? Kids pulling batteries out of the back of a remote and sticking them in there in their bedroom. I mean, I don't know how a parent could search a bedroom, you know, really to find these things, which is why probably comes back to eventually winning this fight the way we did with cigarettes, which is having conversations with kids well before they start, you know, and being that, you know, as much as we don't feel it as parents, you know, all of the research does indicate that conversations with parents are the single most effective prevention, you know, tool out there. Talking to your kids about what you don't want them to do, letting them know what the consequences are, but mostly just setting your values and your beliefs. As much as they do push back, the evidence seems to be that they are listening, you know, at some level.
But it's challenging today, though, because everybody wants that instant turnaround, right? And that example, while we still should be professing it, it takes 10 years to take hold, right? And nobody in today's society is that patient. It's really important to keep hammering that
You know, I was
message
thinking
home.
as we were talking here, I come from an agency, one of my former coworkers is here, we did DARE. I don't know if you still are doing that. And DARE, you know, Granby, before my time here, had a DARE program. My former agency still does. I saw, the 21 years I was in that agency, I saw kids start from, and they have fabulous programs. We do nursery school programs, or still do nursery school, kindergarten, you know, all the way through. Obviously not talking at that age about, but they're seeing a police officer, they're talking about different things. I've sat in their classes and they're fantastic. They're building their self-esteem. They're talking about current issues in each grade, and this program follows them all the way through. And I saw, you know, a beginning class up till where these kids graduated, and I feel like just listening to that, we've kind of lost that a little bit here. I can't, you know, I've only been here in this agency 6 years, and I know they haven't had the DARE program in quite some time, but it's like we talk about getting the kids at a young age, and really, so they're seeing police officers, they're seeing, you know, school officials in a variety of different ways. They know they have somebody to talk to. They're talking about the current issues, you know, that's appropriate for the age, you know, and they're carrying them all the way through. And I feel like without that piece, and I'm talking about our piece as the police, we're kind of losing that. So, you know, now it's all on the parents, or it's all on the school. And if we don't have that buy-in collectively, I feel like we're just listening to what the panel's talking about and the questions that you're bringing up. I feel like we've lost that, a piece of that. You know, I know a lot of agencies around here have officers dedicated specifically to the schools. So those kids are seeing that same person on a consistent basis. Our department, we're in the schools daily. We rotate our officers through all the schools. So the kids are seeing the police. They're taking the time to talk, but maybe not as in-depth as we had with a DARE program. Maybe we need to get back to that. That's just the thought. I'm hearing that, and I'm like, I feel like we've missed an opportunity, and like we can't do it. I'll speak as a parent. We can't do it by ourselves. You know, it's not just the youth services
and
or the
schools can't do
schools.
it all. And
Exactly. I think
absolutely cannot do
collectively,
it
and
all.
when we're all plugged in together, who benefits? The kid, obviously, but we all do.
Are there any parents here from East Granby? No. Yeah. So in East Granby and Canton, the health department has developed a program called Resilience Grows Here, which in East Granby now is in the elementary school all the way up through 12th. And it's the kind of program you're talking about in terms of its continuity. It is age appropriate, it grows, but it's really about helping build the resilient attributes of youth over their school career with support from the teachers and community partners and law enforcement. We work actually with the Air National Guard, and some of the reservists and veterans come in. But, you know, vaping is the issue du jour, and unfortunately it's going to be with us for a while. But, you know, it's fundamentally, you know, working on those strategies, and Anne Marie talked about it in terms of building those resilient attributes that are going to increasingly protect our youth from, you know, challenges, everyday challenges of life, making good decisions, whether they, you know, make good choices, etc. So I think there is, as you point out, a need to go back and revisit some of that.
A couple questions. One is, it's 21, right, to be able to buy?
Yes, yes.
Is it federal or is Massachusetts different age?
Massachusetts is 21.
21. So, okay, so I was just wondering in case they cross the
Red
border.
water.
Yeah.
Good one.
And
They do.
And if they're going to be going into their classes with discussing vaping, is there any way that as parents we could get that information sent home to us as well, so that we could continue discussion at home, like send home one of these like discussions or something that maybe we can continue at the dinner table? I think that that might be something
We did,
to...
I just can tell you, when we went last year into the classes, we did notify parents that we were doing that, and we shared some of our concerns. And at the high school level, I can't speak to the middle school level, but I agree. I think that the handouts tonight, please grab them. They're excellent, and I think parents need that at their
because there's
fingertips.
a couple of facts in here that were very eye-opening.
Yep.
The 20 cigarette thing really got me.
Yeah.
And Google the stuff, is that the right word? I'm not young enough. That your kids are looking at. Like, there's YouTube videos
Yes.
that will teach kids how to hide the vaping in school, or so there's as much counter messaging out there that you probably also should, you know, and it's hard to keep up, right? As parents, it's really hard to keep up.
There's stuff that they're marketing, like fake water bottles that the bottom drops out, fake lipsticks that the bottom drops out, and so those things are being sold to kids to help hide it from when you're searching a backpack. You can't be untwisting every water bottle inside the backpack. Oh, good for you.
But no, you're right.
But yeah.
And a lot of the products look like, I was just thinking, they look like cosmetics.
Right.
You can just throw it in your makeup bag.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would just also like to comment, this has been on Granby Cable TV, it will be. Encourage all your friends, everyone you know who has someone in the school system primarily, to watch this program. I learned an awful lot tonight. I was aware, but not the level I've got this evening about how pervasive the problem was. I've got my marching orders, what I need to take back to the legislature, which is good, which is one of the reasons I came here tonight. Also, the information, the handouts there, we're going to send that out in email blasts that I send out, so anyone who subscribes to me, my Facebook page and stuff like that, they'll be able to have access to that too. So, any other questions? Well, I just can't thank the panelists enough. You've opened my eyes and given me marching orders, which is why I came here. You have my information. If any way I can assist you, please come in contact with me. And thank you all for coming out tonight. Please spread the message. My marching orders to you: spread the message. Tell all you, take the information back there, share it, and tell people, please watch Granby Cable TV, because there's a great amount of information from people who have expertise, who know what's going on, and can educate us all.
There's also good podcasts on, on Apple Podcasts, and I can't remember where else we are. Spotify, yes, thank you for me not knowing where it is. And we had an episode of it I was on your TV show.
That's right.
So yes, there's a lot of good information out there. Share it, and really appreciate you coming.
Thank you so much. Please spread the word.